Hey, everybody, it's Richard Harris and Scott Leese with another episode of the Surf and Sales podcast. Here with someone who we both have grown to know and admire over the last many years, someone I've looked up to as I've built my business, Lori Richardson. So, Lori, welcome to the Surf and Sales podcast.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So, just for context, and for the 1.1% of people who don't know who you are, right? Kind of like who's never been on an airplane, you got to pay attention. What do you do? Like, what is your current organization with Score More Sales? You also have women sales pros. Like, just give people some context of where you're coming from, and to a certain extent, feel free to go back to, well, I started my sales career here.
Sure. I began my sales career in my early 20s, and I after about 15 or so years working in sales, mostly tech sales, got into some leadership, and then did a little diagonal, got into building corporate university, and always focused on learning and sales development. So when I say sales development, I mean developing everybody in sales. And in 2002, actually not far after 9/11, I started my sales consultancy, which is Score More Sales. So we help mid-market, large SMB companies to solve sales issues and to fix problems that they have in hiring salespeople and in just evaluating the health of their existing sales team. And about 6 years ago, I started Women Sales Pros because I realized that it turned out most of my clients were male, and I didn't understand why that was after being in sales so long and knowing how well women could do. So I run both of those, and different tracks. Sometimes they cross over and overlap.
You mentioned starting your consulting firm in 2002, kind of, maybe I heard this wrong, but sort of like post 9/11. Was 9/11 sort of a catalyst in any way for you to take a big, kind of leap and make that shift? I'm asking because I wonder if people, are using this moment as a catalyst to maybe go start their own businesses and things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's a lot of comparisons, and I've had a lot of conversations over the other, some of the other hurdles we've overcome in the past. For me, it was coincidental that when 9/11 happened, my company was about to be acquired, and my position, which was probably more highly paid than it should have been, was just one of those that was targeted to be eliminated because we already had somebody in the place that was acquiring us. And I just happened to realize that I really didn't want to be a salesperson. I really didn't want to be a sales leader, but I wanted to help companies. Once 9/11 happened, I realized there was a real tough economy for some time, and I did want to help companies to solve their sales issues. And my company that let me go actually became my first client. As it turned out, they liked me. They just didn't want to pay me my big salary. So that's how it all started.
That's great. You talk about, and I know you, because I've had deep conversations about this, about sort of the psyche of the salesperson and analyzing, sales teams. At a high level, what are you seeing as the strengths of salespeople, right? And it doesn't mean, look, everybody's got to be a high D on the DISC scale or an I or whatever, right? Like I think people gravitate to that because it's just sort of what we've heard and known. What are some of the other things that you've learned that you would encourage people to look for when they're hiring salespeople?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that nobody knows everything. We don't have it's not black and white. Sales has been an elusive category. It's been an elusive area for many years. I mean, years ago, we just called it the black hole, because nobody really knew who was doing what. And we certainly have a lot of tools now to help with that. But I came at it from the standpoint that I was doing a lot of training and working with sales teams, and I couldn't really tell when I delivered some training whether it made any difference or not. And I got very frustrated with the fact that I couldn't measure my results. And the more I did it, the more frustrated I got. And that's when I started looking into tools to help measure performance and to help understand what makes up a good salesperson. So for me, it's the will that people, that's one of the strongest areas of importance for sales, is to have those characteristics that make up the will to
And what do you think those characteristics are? How do you try to pinpoint that?
It's whether you have the desire and whether you have the commitment, and then what your outlook is. I heard Kevin Gaither's interview with you guys recently. There's a lot of parallels: motivation and responsibility. If someone won't take responsibility, it's going to be tough. If they're not coachable, it's going to be a futile effort. So what a lot of people have looked for traditionally, which are sales skills and industry knowledge, I think that's just detail. I mean, we can train anybody on sales skills, and we can train, on our industry for that matter. But what we can't train on is your outlook, deep down, the outlook that you have, your responsibility, your motivation, and your desire.
This aligns with Scott 100%. Like, Scott's been doing this,
Good.
Scott's sitting here going in his head. He's like, man, if I'd have just figured out a way to take this out of my brain and put it in a machine, I'd be retired. Right?
Yeah.
So Scott, just again, from your perspective, right? How do you, because I know will is important and their story is important. How are those things how do you try to measure that for people when you were hiring folks?
Oh man. Well, I mean, Lori already said that it's a bit of a mystery and nobody has all the answers. So let me just start with that, if I was going to go hire 20 AEs right now, I'm sure I'd screw up hiring at least a few of them, because it's not, it's not easy. But, I tend to gravitate towards people who've demonstrated some of these things in non-work environments. So people who've been through the ringer, maybe health-wise or relationship-wise, or have just overcome and had to struggle. Maybe they worked their way through school, for example, rather than, having scholarships. Just these different ways that people have exhibited some type of toughness, maybe is a word that I like.
Yeah.
And Lori used the word will. It's like will to succeed, maybe will to go on, will to continue to persist and pursue goals and that kind of thing. So I try to get people to open up and tell me some stories from their life. So I learn a little bit about who they are. Much like Lori, I think I could care less about somebody's industry experience. And I certainly can train people who don't have much sales experience in general if they've got some of these other things. So, I tend to care more about who somebody is right now, what made them that, and what do they want to end up being? What do they want to become next? And so I try to just learn about somebody to judge for those things.
Yeah.
Right?
Doesn't hurt to have a little chip on your shoulder.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
I've got to say that 1,000 times.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Where does your chip come from, Lori? If I can ask, the chip on your shoulder.
Absolutely. Well, my first sales job in, beyond when I was young, when I had a lemonade stand on a dead end street. So that's how I learned referral selling.
Wow.
But I got into technology sales in you know, as my first job in sales in my early 20s, and I was a single mom. And I had a chip on my shoulder because I just wanted to get in there and learn everything and do what I had to do and sell and get out of there. And I wanted to be in the top 20%. That was always my goal. So
But what was the chip? Was it that I am a single mom? Was it that, hey, this looks like a boys club, so I really need to succeed? Like,
no,
or is it?
no, it was just incredibly hard for me to juggle everything. And so I had a very supportive, amazing group of people that I worked with. We were
Mhm.
all, it was just an incredible group of both reps and leaders. And I attribute some of my success to the fact that I had such a good first experience. Not all of them after that were. But it was just hard, you know. It's hard when you are the sole breadwinner and you don't have a big supportive family or, you know, network to help you out. And I think that just kept me focused and hungry and determined.
What did you do? Because it's very different, right? Like, you know, it wasn't always easy where you could just text someone, say, hey, can you go pick up my child, or can you go do that? You know, it was
Yeah,
totally different. Like,
yeah.
what kinds of things did you sort of, how did you manage through that? My mom was a single mom, so I know how she did it, but I'm always curious because it's very different now generationally.
Yeah, I mean, I had to find companies that were as supportive as possible. You know, it totally varied in the different industries and or in the different organizations. And you know, I just juggled stuff. I mean, to this day, I probably juggle too many projects because I'm just used to doing that kind of mindset. So it's probably, I probably do less of a top job in any one area because I'm juggling things. And I think it's just from what I've just from the way it was for so long.
One more sort of question on that. You talked about that you had this great group of teammates and leaders,
Yeah.
right? And what kind of traits do you know, I'm thinking there's got to be a couple of single parents out there right now that are going through this. And what are the things that you noticed in that leadership that made you, and I would say loyal, because they understood your world, right? Like they were willing to support you. Anything you could sort of tell people to look for in those leaders?
Yeah. Look for people that care about who you are and what your goals are. I mean, it's great to have company goals and corporate goals, but we all have individual goals. We all have aspirations. And I think if you feel like you're really being seen and heard, that's something that I hear from people, individual contributors periodically, is that they don't feel like their opinion is being valued and they don't feel like their manager is listening. You know, that direct supervisor, that's the one that is going to influence us the most as to whether we want to hang around or not. And most, as you guys know, that's a very lacking area in terms of training and coaching. And so that's a big takeaway for me was how important that role is of the frontline sales managers and how they need to be coached and trained on an ongoing basis.
Got it. Got it. Did you have a, I'll ask one last question and then Scott wants to jump in. You said you had this chip on your shoulder when you know, as you became the single parent breadwinner, but did you have a chip on your shoulder when you were a kid too? Was Lori, you know, that competitive, or was this sort of situationally created for you?
Yeah, I was the youngest of five, so I had to speak up and I had to get out there because I didn't, nobody cut me a break in my family. And I would say I am competitive. I'm not one of those win at all costs kind of people, but I do like to win, and I don't like to lose. So I think that came from, I don't know where it came from really. A little bit of sports, but it was really is probably some of my relatives more than anything else.
I want to go back to your story about the lemonade stand on a dead end street. I think is
Yeah,
what I heard you say, and how it taught you about the power of referrals.
yeah.
What could AEs do right now to increase the number of referrals that they're able to generate for themselves?
Everybody has adjacent industries that call on some of the same people. And if you can identify reps and thought leaders and just people in industries that also call on the companies that you call on, they can make for really powerful recommenders and advocates. So I think that's the first idea that I would offer. And just building up a strong network of people in general, and getting to know people, and working to build your own brand. As an AE, you don't spend all your time on it, but you do work to build it outside of your company. I think that's important.
Yeah, I think that referrals tends to be something that is really tricky for AEs to kind of crack the
Yeah.
code of, whatever. What did you do with the lemonade stand? How did you get referrals? Were you savvy enough at that age to say, hey, go tell your friends, go tell your parents or whatever?
That's what we did. Yeah. My siblings help with that too. And kids at school. But yeah, that's what we did, because we were on this little, it was actually called Icky Bartlett, because I lived on Bartlett Avenue, and it was a little skinny part of the road, which was just a few blocks long. And it seems silly. I don't even know why I thought I could do it in the first place, but I've always tackled crazy projects. And so, over time, word of mouth, and people told other people, and it was a pretty thriving little lemonade stand, if I might say.
How long did you have this lemonade stand? Was this like a couple of weeks, or was this like, no, this is really what I did for a long time?
Oh, it was a couple of summers for
Oh,
sure.
Wow.
And then eventually I ended up working in my grandmother's clothing store. My grandmother had a women's retail apparel store, and I grew up in Seattle. And her big competitor was probably Nordstrom at the time, and she was just a little shop. But that's where I learned all sorts of other sales lessons, which I didn't know at the time. You don't know these things until much later. But I realized I learned a lot, because she never discounted except once a year. And she had a really good relationship with her customers. And she also stood up for herself. And that made a big impression on me.
what does that mean, stood up for herself?
Well, about 3 or 4 times a year, when you're in the apparel business, you buy merchandise. And so if you're in Seattle, you don't have a market week like they do in New York or LA. And so the salesmen, and they're all men at the time, they would come to you. So they would set up in a fancy hotel in downtown, and we would go in, and you'd go from room to room and choose the clothing that you'd be selling in an upcoming season. So I'd go with my grandmother, and she would see things that she knew her customers wouldn't like, because she knew her customers really well. And she would tell these guys, my customers won't buy that. And they'd say, oh, Mrs. Hall, oh, you just don't really know what you're doing. This is a younger thing. This is a new thing. And she'd say, no, my customers won't like it. And they'd say, you're crazy. I remember them saying that to her. And she'd say, go to hell. And she'd stick to her guns. And then sure enough, it was like midi skirts or maxi skirts, something that wasn't a big hit. It was just, very much a fad. And the next time we'd go to the market week, they'd say, oh, Mrs. Hall, you were right. And she'd go, I know I was. And she's probably the first woman that I ever saw stand up to people and just say, I know my customers. And later on, I came to realize that was a really powerful lesson.
That's a great story. You talked about taking on lots of projects and spreading yourself thin and whatnot. This is a subject like very near and dear to my heart.
Tiny objects.
Yeah, because I tend to think that I can do everything all at once, all at the same time. Have you learned to say no to projects that might be shiny and interesting and might be lucrative as well? And say no to those things and feel confident and comfortable with your decision. This is something that I'm trying to learn, so I need to be taught by Lori right now.
Well, over time, and I'm older than you guys, I've learned that, if you want to do something well, you can't spread yourself out too thin. So if I really want to give something the time that it needs and the attention it needs, I have to say no to other things. And what I found most successful is that I track projects. I keep all my client projects in a project plan. I keep all the other things that I'm working on as projects. So my book is a project. My podcast is a project. Other things that I'm doing would be set like projects. And then from that, I actually break it out. And every week I look at the tasks that need to be done and main goals. So I work to accomplish 3 things in each project. And if I can't get to them all, then I have to carry them over. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it works pretty well. I'm visual, so I need to see it. So I'm one of those mind map kind of people, and I can see all the things. And when I see everything, I go, oh, I can't possibly do all that. So then I have to pick, and I'll narrow it down. Like if
is there like a certain set of criteria that you might use to say yes or no to certain things beyond the obvious, maybe of this one's going to pay 10 times more or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely weigh them and rate them. So I have a rating scale of the value based on what's most important for the future and what's most important for now.
So let me ask you this question, because this is actually where Scott's struggling, is that there are things you can do that are absolutely financially lucrative, right? They're going to make money right now. And then there are things for the brand, right? The Lori Richardson brand, the Women's Sales Pros brand. How do you balance that piece between the money piece that's immediate or sooner versus the brand piece, which will drive revenue in the future, right?
Yeah.
How do you balance that in your scale?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. I mean, I always said for people starting out, for those that might be starting out in a consultancy, I always say that it takes 2 people to build a solopreneur business. So, it's nearly impossible to do things or to have enough financially to and just be lucky enough to find the right people to help you bring your brand and everything together. It's very hard. I work with other people, we have input and we have support that help us, but also it's not perfect. I mean, I'm not a perfectionist, I guess, is one thing to my advantage. And so if something looks like I've neglected it, it's not the end of the world for me. And I know that I'm focusing on bigger things, which is helping clients, helping future clients, sharing my, lessons learned as I can with others, and working to be as helpful as possible in this industry. But it's hard. Yeah.
One of my big challenges is that I keep myself really busy, and I'm fortunate to be doing really well right now. But the ideas that I get tend to be like very big and like absurd almost in how much work and effort might go into to something. And I heard you say earlier that, I can't remember exactly how you phrased it, but you're like a fan of like wild kind of crazy ideas and whatnot. So how have you decided which of these kind of wild hair ideas to pursue and which ones to like table or give over to Richard and let him run with it, right? That kind of
Well, first of all, I think creativity is a gift. And can you imagine the opposite? Can you imagine not getting big ideas and not seeing something that could really impact people and be awesome. I mean, there are people like that that don't
No.
have that.
That's what I
That's
think.
you.
Scott and I are that way. Scott's way more the dreamer, and I'm like, okay, that's a great dream. Now here's how we're going to do it. Right? But I
Yeah.
think that's why we enjoy working together on
That's
stuff
right.
too.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say that as long as you have a Richard, you're going to be all right. You're going to, and vice versa.
That's it,
Oh
Scott.
my god.
You're stuck with me now, buddy.
Oh my gosh. Can't believe she said that.
You find people that are practical out there they're the spreadsheet people. I could do a deal. You probably could too, Scott. You can do a deal on a napkin in a restaurant, right? And
Yeah.
just, come up with the general idea, handshake, and we're off and going. And I always had trouble with even when I was very first in sales, I remember people would come in with spreadsheets and, they'd be comparing features and I just couldn't stand that detail. It's like I couldn't deal with that kind of person.
Scott,
So I'd
I
pass him off to Richard,
yeah.
my Richard, and that would work out well.
This is your new business, Richard. You're just going to be, everybody's Robin to Batman. You balance everybody out because Lori and I can't handle, spreadsheets and reality sometimes, right?
The truth, though, as you get older, I think you learn, you compensate for what you're lacking. And I was on a spreadsheet this morning. I mean, I have learned some basic strategies for keeping track, because the worst thing for me is losing details and losing an important note or important idea just because I had too much going on. Like, to me, that's the worst.
You have a painful story that you could share of losing a note or a deal because you were too scattered?
How much time do we have? I've lost multiple deals just from lack of information, lack of detail, or even a reminder on the calendar. Pretty soon you're like, oh, whatever happened to that guy?
I do have that problem.
Yeah. And so you just, you get it, put a note on the calendar. Sometimes I'll wake up at, I don't know, whenever in the middle of the night. And I have a pencil and paper and I just write down, call so-and-so, or because I wake up in a panic sometimes, not all often, but just like, oh, I didn't do something. And it hits me. So the more you can put out there, I was a really big student of time management a while back, and just getting things done and how to best do that. And there's no one way this is another thing. It's kind of like, sales and marketing and big topics. There's no one way that everyone can do time management, or what we call self-management, well. Right? We have different personalities, and while a mind map works for me, a spreadsheet might work better for somebody else. But finding the tools that work well for you, I think, is a good key.
I want to shift this a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about women in sales and women sales pros. It's a big initiative, and it's something I've tried to help you support.
Yes, and thank you for all you've done.
Yeah, of course. And I know Scott does. You may not know it, but I know how Scott thinks around this stuff too.
Yeah.
You said you started Women's Sales Pros 5 years ago, right? 6 years ago.
So.
Okay.
Yeah, about 6.
Yeah. So what do you feel like the environment looked like then, and what do you think it's feeling like now? Because I'm first of all, I'm of a different gender, so I see it getting better, but I also don't experience it. Like, I don't experience as a woman. I'm not a sales leader who's hiring. Are there things you're noticing that are getting better? Or different, I should say. Maybe better is not the right word.
Yeah, I think different is the word. A few years ago, not many people were even talking about it, I think. Very few people were talking about it. And then more and more research started coming out. About 4, even 5 years ago, we started seeing CEB, which is now Gartner, Discover.org, which is now ZoomInfo. they did a couple of different things, and more people were doing studies, and now it's more common than not that someone will do a study about gender or about diversity and inclusion. And so people are talking about it, which is really good. So what I found a couple of years ago is that you didn't have to sell anybody on the idea. It's like people got it, they just didn't know how to make it happen. And so the change that I've seen is that there are more women in frontline sales roles, and there are more women as frontline managers. But beyond that, that's where our gap is that, you know, the fact that there's between 13 and 18% of VP sales and above are women, depending on the study that you look at, and that number's been flat for more than 12 years. Like, that's a problem. You know, that's a real problem, because we know that women can be great leaders, and we know that women can be great in sales. Doesn't mean everybody is, just like not all men are either. But the lack of diversity is just, it's mind-boggling to me at times, and it shows that there are a lot of, it's a complex issue. There's no one thing, that a flip that switch, or a switch that's flipped, and then it's all better. So I think right now, this moment with COVID-19, work from home, and how sales is going to change in the future is a pivotal moment. And we all have the opportunity to make sales what we want it to be in the future. We don't have to go back to what we did before.
So what are some of the specific things that you're working on in order to bring about this, you know, much needed change? What are some of the things that you are like, okay, well, I can do these 1, 2, 3 things.
Yeah.
You can do these 10 things.
Yeah, and that's when I'm like you, and I want to do 100 things, but I can't.
Yeah, right.
I have to pick. You're right. I have to pick. So one thing that I am doing is I support, and Women's Sales Pro supports all the efforts that anyone is doing, male or female, to help advance the cause of more diversity and inclusion of all types in sales. That includes mental health, that includes age, that includes ethnicity, everything. So I would like to see sales reflect who the buyers are and what buyers look like, and how buyers are. So I try to feature, and we're doing more of this, to feature and highlight women who are doing cool things. When someone on LinkedIn will say, hey, what are the top books that you like? I'll mention the books that Women's Sales Pros have written, and not because I think they're better, but I think they're different. Because if you just look at a list, anybody's list of top 100 books, you know, 92% are written by men, and that's fine, because that's what's happened in the past. But there are also some really great insights that people can gain from, you know, from a little change up.
Same list, right? It's the same list of 100, right? Like I really like that list that you have, because it's like, these are not, because, you know, maybe with the exception of, you know, Trish and Jill Conrath, right? Like I honestly wouldn't know who else. Like, so tell people some of these books, like people who are listening, like who are they? Because I don't know, and I'm openly ignorant about it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to leave anybody out, but you know, Lisa Earl McLeod's Selling with Noble Purpose, Julie Hansen, Act Like a Sales Pro. A while back, Colleen Francis wrote a book called Nonstop Sales Boom. All the, you know, the Jill Conrath books are great. She hasn't written anything in a couple of years, but most of them are pretty timeless.
You mentioned that you're working on a book.
Yes.
Can you share? Can you share the topic? What it's?
Yeah, it's called She Sells, and it's about attracting, retaining, and promoting great women in B2B sales. So it's written for the sales leaders and company leaders that ask me questions all the time and bring me in to consult with them on how to not just hire more women, but to keep them. I believe right now, in addition to it being a great opportunity for more women sales leaders, it's also a time when women who might be heads of households or even in a two-parent family, they're probably running the household, and there might be kids that they're homeschooling, and then they have a quota and they've lost some customers, and my goodness, that's a lot of pressure for somebody to have. And if I can move over into a different role, support or something else, maybe I'll do that. And so I think we may lose some of our women in sales because of that, just because of the pressure from right now.
Scott, I'm glad we got Lori on now, because that book's going to be a bestseller, like legit New York Times. I'm calling it out right now. No pressure, Lori.
Thanks, Richard.
No pressure. No pressure.
Seriously, like that's an amazing. That's going to be an amazing book, and I look forward to seeing it and reading it, and then sharing it with people I know. So,
I was bummed out that I didn't get it done sooner, but then when COVID hit, I realized I really want it to be a post-COVID book. So it's not like, oh yeah, that was a nice to have, but now we're like survival. We're in survival mode. We can do both. We can craft things the way we want to. It's up to us.
do you there's the gender disparity, and we could even just call it ethnic disparity. It's way more than gender, right?
Right.
Do you think it's because women have been shied away, or is it because women were sort of thought to go to marketing because sales wasn't necessarily a degree to follow? Like, what are you like? And again, like you said it yourself, there's no one thing, right?
Right. It's a
But
bunch of things.
there's a bunch of things.
It's a bunch of things. People like my daughter-in-law who said, I went into marketing so I could get a degree. You can't get a degree in sales, when she went through. Now there are 160 sales programs. I don't know if you knew that.
Yeah.
Because people kind of toss around 50 or 60. I've heard people say that a lot. There are more sales programs and more programs that aren't connected with universities, where you can get an education, learn to sell, and then get a job. So that's really great news. I wish we had that when I had started. I would have loved that. I actually went through an apprenticeship program because when I left teaching, I was a teacher until I became a single mom, and I couldn't afford to raise my family. I guess that gave me my chip on my shoulder right there. But I looked at all these non-traditional jobs for women, like, pouring cement and scaffolding and all these blue collar things. And it wasn't until the guy came in and talked about technology, and then I somehow connected that I could sell it because I grew up in my grandmother's store. And amazingly, miraculously, through no planning of my own, I kind of stumbled into the beginning of the technology era, in the 80s. So it worked out really well for me, but it wasn't because of a grand plan.
I don't think sales is rarely the grand plan, right? I think that we've all seen that happen.
Well, I intentionally looked for a sales job. I mean, I knew I could sell, and that's a difference with a lot of people I talk to, that I intentionally left teaching, which is what my dream was to be, to make more money. And I went in to make money and support my family. And
But the beautiful thing, and nobody explained this to me, and I just, and everybody knows this, but like what you're doing all day, every day is teaching people.
Yeah, I know.
So you found a way to marry the two,
miracle
passions, right, together. And so that's the sweet spot, right?
Exactly.
I think most people, to find real fulfillment.
And helping. We're helping in our sales role. And I believe that sales we're the helpers that are going to get the economy back. We're part of the answer. We're part of the solution. And it's really awesome to be part of a solution and not just, frozen, like what's going to happen. We know what's going to happen. We're going to help this economy get kickstarted again and get back to, not only where we were, but beyond that.
I mean, you talked about being able to get an education. I mean, with everybody working from home, there's been a just a flood of like daily online events where people are, you know, dropping knowledge and helping everybody else out. And if I was trying to learn the craft and the field of sales, I feel like I could be getting a bachelor's degree in selling
right now
from home, whether it's so-and-so's event here, this happy hour here, this webinar there, all the different podcasts and whatnot. Do you have favorites that you steer people towards, things that
I'm
you?
just laughing because that's overwhelming too.
Yeah, no, I know.
If you're like me, I'm like, you
Yeah.
know, I could go 10 hours and not hit every happy hour and, you know, invite and
Yeah.
podcast. Next week is Outreach's event. And, you
Right.
know, there's just so many things going on. But
are you excited to give your talk? What are you talking about at the Unleash event, Kim?
Yeah. So I am with Henry Schuck, the CEO of ZoomInfo, and Liz Kane, who's a partner with OpenView, and talking all about leadership in tough times and a little diversity thrown in there. So that's a great time for me, you know, to talk with leaders that are in the midst of, you know, a lot of big decisions and issues to be thinking about.
Oh, that's awesome. Are there any suggestions you can give to either diversity of gender, male or female, about working with the other, right? Because as much as we don't want to sort of, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Stereotype people, there are just differences in humans, right? There are just certain differences. So what are the things you've been able to learn and glean upon to help others expand their own horizon?
Yeah, I don't think I know. This is one of my crutch words, think. What I know is that we can't know enough communication. Like, we can always learn communication skills that will be more helpful. And often they're just miscommunications, or we're saying the same things only differently. And I think that if you have a bigger picture mindset, that's what helps me, is to try to be bigger picture, if that makes sense, and ask for clarification and just, you know, focus on common goals rather than the minutia or details.
Any example come to mind that we're like, oh, here's something I've experienced. I don't want you to bash anybody, but would love a concrete example.
I mean, I think it happens a lot of times when, like I say that I hear from a lot of women who feel like their immediate supervisor isn't supporting them and isn't listening to them and isn't helping them to get to where they want. Well, the research that Dr. Joelle Laban and I have been doing shows that, you know, women and men are different. As we know, women and men are different, but women are different in terms of some of the things that they want to see happen. When you start at a new company, I want to know more about what my future potential is there. I want to know about the professional development opportunities. And I think that women tend to, not exclusively, but women tend to plan a little further out. And so I'm thinking like, okay, this is great now and for next year, but, you know, in 5 years, where I think men don't necessarily do that as much. It's more like, what does it pay? Who am I working for? What's the commute? You know, and I just think that's one of the reasons why women stay in a role a year longer than men do. You know, that's part of the reason that research has shown. And we're just thinking too much, too far out sometimes.
So Scott, I know Scott and I are grinning because we're both thinking about our wives.
Yeah.
How, you know, things are being thought of, and we're like, no, just solve the problem, right? Let's just solve the problem. I have
And
a
that's
question.
good. And we need to embrace that, right? If we can just accept that you might
I'm,
have a different perspective than me.
I'm also laughing at the suggestion that I might be able to think 5 years ahead in anything
Yeah.
in my life, let alone sales or business or career.
I have a question. You know,
I don't have that skill.
yeah, the statistic is, and I know we kind of got to wrap it up, but you know, the statistic is that, you know, the average VP of sales lasts 18 months. Is there a statistic yet that breaks that down by gender? And I wonder if women are lasting longer.
Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I'd like to. I would like to
That'd
see
be an
that.
interesting statistic, I think.
Yeah, maybe LinkedIn can help us.
Yeah. So
Shout out
tell
to
us,
LinkedIn if anyone's listening.
yeah. Um, well, this has been great, Lori. Thank you for coming on. You shared a bunch of great stuff, and I love your storytelling. So I'm excited for your book too. So I
Thank
appreciate it.
you.
What
Thanks
can
so
we do
much.
to help you? Yeah. How can we help Lori?
Well, here's what everybody can do to help me and to help what I'm championing for more diversity and inclusion on sales teams is to when you see things like on LinkedIn, when it's a list of all guys, when you see podcasts that are all guys, which most sales podcasts are, just keep an open mind, and women don't want to be the ones to say, hey, where are the other books? I'll always do it because I don't mind doing that, and I'll post my list of books, and I'll post other authors and things like that. But it's nice to have you guys do it, because we can't change anything without you. It takes men to help change sales, and we need your help.
What are the women-led podcasts you're listening to? And I'll be honest, I can't think of one. I'm not a huge podcast guy, but are there women out there doing this?
Yeah, Barb Giamanco has had one for a while on conversations with women in sales. And I have a half a dozen others that they're not all coming to the top of my head. But there are some that people have started up. Suzanne Paling started one. There are some others, and I'd be happy to put a list together. I think that would be good.
Yeah, no, I just want to make sure people think about it, because I don't think about it, and I want to make sure we give people that opportunity. So
Yeah, and another thing is that a lot of podcast hosts will say that it's hard to find women to appear. And if anyone has that trouble, please feel free to reach out, and I can give you a list of 50 or 100 women who would do it.
that'd be great. Well, Lori, this has been fantastic. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you
Yeah,
both. It was my
Thanks, Lori.
pleasure.
yeah, it's been great. Where people can find you on LinkedIn? Do you want to give out an email address? What do you want
Yep.
for those?
Find me at LinkedIn, at Women Sales Pros, at Score More Sales on Twitter, Instagram. We're around Facebook, you name it. We're out there. Love to connect with people.
Awesome. Thanks, Lori. We really appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.